And we have economists who supposedly are for the free market, and they're libertarians, supposedly they claim to be, or especially the ones who are conservatives. Of course, they're never going to mention this because this is the one big government program they like, so they don't want to cast it in a bad light.
Yeah. Well, on the machine tool thing, it reminds me of your article the other day on LouRockwell.com where you talk about the robber baron who refused to take any government subsidies for delivering the mail across the ocean, and the guy that was dependent on the government subsidies, he just wouldn't innovate his business enough, and he ended up being outcompeted by the guy who wasn't subsidized. That often happens, right?
Yeah, that it definitely does. It distorts it distorts your decision making, because in the same way we saw that in developing the railroads. I mean, if in the 19th century, if you're going to get land grants and you're going to get more land grants, the more circuitous your route is, and the more dangerous the route is, so the more mountainous the terrain and everything. Well, what does that encourage you to do? It encourages you to build on mountainous terrain and have a circuitous route. Whereas when you had James J. Hill building a railroad from St. Paul to Seattle without any government aid at all, he didn't have the luxury of producing such an insane, ridiculous thing. Mm-hmm. Instead, he built the flattest track he could, the most directly he could. That's what a free market system encourages. It doesn't encourage the bizarre distortions we've seen now. And what's even funnier is that when some of these major so-called defense firms then turned to try to produce mass transit systems for various American cities, they were, again, way over cost or totally unreliable, or they broke down all the time. It's just you get sucked into a black hole, a productive black hole, the more you get caught up in this Pentagon nexus.
Mm-hmm. I think there's something, a lot of times there are truths that are so obvious, but you don't really think of them until somebody says it out loud, and then you go, oh, yeah, okay. So there's this thing that economists talk about all the time, and I don't think just Austrians, the seen and the unseen. Now, when you talk about, okay, this submarine cost this much money, and that's money that could have gone to something else, there's also the fact that the money that goes into the submarine is basically destroyed, where if that money had gone into something private and productive, it would have been used to create even more wealth, right, and to expand opportunities that people didn't even imagine. They don't even know, like Rumsfeld's unknown unknowns, right? All these things that we don't even know the ripple effects of what would have happened if we hadn't have taken these trillions of dollars and shot them in outer space the way we have.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because and that's one of Melman's points, is that this spending by the Pentagon is parasitic spending. He says, he's not a pacifist, so he doesn't say there should be no Department of Defense or anything, but he says that, once we have enough weapon power to destroy each enemy city 6 times over. I mean, presumably that should be just about enough, right? I mean, that might even be overkill. So then we have to really think of this as just being pure loss, because, as you say, that money, if it had stayed in the private sector, might have gone, for example, to replace regular shovels with steam shovels, so we can do more work with the application of less effort. We can thereby create wealth. So, in other words, we would be able to spend that money on things that pay for themselves in terms of the new stuff they produce. This doesn't pay for itself. It's just all destroyed, or it all sits there. It's not necessary for the security of the country, but it lines the pockets of influential people. And every single time, and I mean every time, there's been a blue ribbon commission over the decades to investigate the cost overruns in the military industry, blah, blah, blah. Well, they all come up with the same results, which is, this is a disaster. I mean, it's obviously a cozy relationship between a revolving door of government and industry officials padding each other's pockets and whatever. We got to stop this. And then nothing is ever done. Because this is the nature. This is how governments are.
That's funny. I just interviewed a girl from, a woman from Mother Jones, who did an article like this, and she actually has the list of every commission that they ever created to do something about this and examine the problem and all those things.
And it never gets done. And then Melman also made the point, and he was attacking other people on the left, particularly the Marxist left, who argued that if the U.S. were to get rid of a lot of its military spending, then it would the economy would collapse. Because we weren't spending this money on the military, then we would just collapse.
Well, that's got to be true, at least temporarily, right? It would be a catastrophe. Well, trillions of dollars having to be redirected all around.
Well, that's true. I mean, temporarily, yeah, you'd have to figure out, okay, well, what are we going to deploy this money for now? But the point is that eventually the money would be redeployed for civilian use. It's not like we'd all sit around scratching our heads saying, darn it, now that we're not squandering $1 trillion, I mean, I don't know, I can't imagine where these resources could go. I mean, in fact, when you talked about the seen and the unseen, the classic essay, of course, is by Frederick Bastiat from the 19th century when he talks about a kid throwing a baseball through a window and it breaks the window, and people say, oh, no, that's good because that'll give money to the guy who repairs the window. But, okay, but then where would that money have gone if you hadn't had to blow it on replacing a window? Well, what's forgotten is that Bastiat also gave a military example. He said, suppose we bring 100,000 troops back from overseas, are we just going to collapse into depression because there's nothing for these men to do? No, the spending stream that we used to direct toward them and whatever they spent the money on, alcohol and prostitutes or whatever, can be redirected into civilian needs. I mean, sure there's an adjustment period, but I for one am willing to live through that in order not to see my money blown on products produced by race